The advertisement ran 4 lines in the back of the county paper, and Gideon Marsh meant every cold word of it. Widower seeks capable housekeeper. No nonsense. No romance. Wages fair. Expectations plain. Apply by post to the Marsh Ranch, 2 Forks. He had written it at his kitchen table on a January night with his bad hand wrapped in a rag. Because the bread had gone moldy and the floor had gone filthy, and a man cannot rope a steer and scrub a pot with fingers that no longer close right. He had not written it because he was lonely. Gideon Marsh would have told you, flat and certain, that he had buried loneliness in the same grave as his first wife 11 years before, and that he intended to live out the rest of his days exactly as he was, quiet, hard, and answerable to no living soul. He got 6 replies. 5 of them he threw in the fire. The 6th was written in a small, sharp, fearless hand, and it did not beg, and it did not flatter. I can cook, mend, garden, doctor a sick animal, and keep accounts better than most men. I do not faint, gossip, or weep. I will need the wages paid on time. Yours, Hannah, Vesper. He wrote back one word, come, and that single word, he would say 40 years later with tears standing in his old eyes, was the greatest mistake of his entire life, and the only blessing he had ever been given. She came on the Thursday stage, and Gideon was waiting with the wagon, and the moment she stepped down, he knew the arrangement was already in trouble. He had pictured a meek, gray, grateful sort of woman. What stepped down off that stage was a tall, straight-backed woman of perhaps 40, with iron in her spine and a level, gray gaze that took one long look at him at the gray-shot beard, the stooped shoulder, the bandaged hand, and seemed to add him up entirely in the space of a breath. "You'll be Mr. Marsh," she said. It was not a question. "I'll be. You didn't say, in your advertisement, that you'd let your home fall to ruin." She was looking past him now, toward the ranch in the distance, the sagging porch, the broken fence. "I can see from here it'll take me a month just to make it fit to live in." Gideon Marsh had not been spoken to like that by anyone in 11 years. He found, to his great irritation, that he had nothing to say. "Well," she said briskly, picking up her own carpetbag before he could reach for it, "are we going to stand at the road all afternoon, or are you going to drive me to my work?" That was Hannah Vesper. That was, exactly and forever, Hannah Vesper. To understand what she walked into, you have to understand what Gideon Marsh had become. He had married young, married for love, to a soft-spoken girl named Iris, who had died bearing a child that did not live a single day. He had been 33. After that, something in Gideon had simply closed, the way a house is closed up for a long absence, shutters drawn, fires cold, the good rooms covered in sheets. He worked his cattle. He kept his fences. He spoke to no one he did not have to, and he had got so used to the silence of his own house that he had come to believe the silence was the same thing as peace. It was not, but a man can spend a long time confusing the two. The folks in 2 Forks had given up on him. Old Marsh, they called him, though he was not yet old. He'll work that ranch till it kills him, and there won't be a soul to mourn him. They said it the way people say, a settled fact. And Gideon, who heard it, told himself he didn't care, and almost believed that too. Then Hannah Vesper walked into his cold, closed-up house and threw open every shutter in it. She was, by any honest reckoning, the best thing that had happened to that ranch in 20 years. Within a month, the house was scrubbed bright, the garden turned and planted, the accounts squared, the larder full. Within 2 months, she had reorganized his entire kitchen, fired his lazy hired man, hired a better one for less, and informed Gideon that he was eating like a bachelor fool and would be eating like a sensible man from now on. And within 3 months, the trouble began, though it was not the trouble Gideon had feared. It was the talk. A widower and an unmarried woman, living under one roof, no kin between them, in a town like 2 Forks, that was kindling, and gossip is a careless thing that flicks lit matches. The preacher came out personally, hat in hand, and explained with great delicacy that the situation, however innocent, was a scandal, that respectable women would not have Hannah at their quilting, that men would talk about her in ways no decent woman should be talked about, and that Mr. Marsh, as a Christian, ought to consider the woman's good name. Gideon listened with his jaw working. Then he went and found Hannah in the garden. "They're saying things," he told her gruffly, "about you, about us." "I know what they're saying," Hannah said, not looking up from her beans. "I've known for weeks. I'd hoped you were too stubborn to notice. You could lose your good name." "I could." She straightened then and looked at him with those level gray eyes, and for the first time he saw beneath the iron something tired and unprotected. "I have no family, Mr. Marsh. No husband, no children, no fortune. My good name is very nearly the only thing I own, and I will not give it up to be the subject of a town's filthy talk." "Then you'd leave." "Then I'd have to." Gideon Marsh stood in the garden a long moment. Then he said the words that would shape the next 40 years of 2 lives, and he said them as plain and unromantic as a man buying a horse. "Marry me, in name. I'll not trouble you. You'll have your own room and your own keys and your own say in this house. But you'll have my name, and no man in this county will dare say a word against it. It's only sensible." Hannah Vesper studied him for what felt like a very long time. "That," she said at last, "is the least romantic proposal a woman has ever received." "It wasn't meant to be romantic." "No," she said, and something almost like a smile touched the corner of her mouth. "No, I don't suppose it was." "Very well, Mr. Marsh. I'll marry you." For the sake of sense. They were married the following Sunday, in an empty church, with the preacher's wife and the hired man for witnesses. Neither of them wore anything special. Neither of them said a word more than the vows required, and both of them told themselves, walking out into the cold, bright afternoon as husband and wife, that nothing at all had truly changed. They were both, of course, entirely wrong. It is a strange thing to live beside a person day after day, year after year, when you have promised each other nothing but sense. The change came so slowly that neither of them could ever afterwards say when it had happened. It was in the small things. It was Hannah leaving a lamp burning in the window on the nights Gideon rode the far pasture, though she told herself it was only so he wouldn't break his neck in the dark. It was Gideon learning, without ever being asked, exactly how she took her coffee and having it ready by her plate each morning. It was the way the silence between them stopped being the silence of 2 strangers and became, somewhere along the way, the easy silence of 2 people who no longer needed words. The year the prairie fire came, Gideon understood for the first time what he had. It came up fast, on a dry August wind, a wall of smoke on the western horizon, and Gideon was out with the cattle when he saw it. He rode for the house with his heart in his throat, not for the house. He realized as he rode, not for the barn or the cattle, but for her, and he found Hannah already on the roof, with wet sacking and a bucket brigade of every hand on the place, fighting the embers as they fell, her face black with soot and her gray eyes blazing, refusing to let his home burn. They beat that fire back together through the whole of one terrible night, side by side on the roof. And when the dawn came gray and the danger had passed, Gideon Marsh looked at his exhausted, soot-streaked, indomitable wife, and he understood with a clarity that frightened him that he loved her more than he had ever loved anything in his life. He did not tell her. He was 60 by then, and a coward in only this one thing. It was Hannah, in the end, who said it first, and she said it the way she said everything, plainly, without warning, over the supper dishes. "I want you to know," she said, scrubbing a pot, not looking at him, "that I did not stay all these years for the wages." Gideon set down the plate he was drying. "I stayed," Hannah went on, her voice steady but her hands suddenly still in the water, "because somewhere in all these years this stopped being an arrangement and started being my whole life. And I would like, before we are both too old and foolish to say such things, to know whether I have been a wife to you only in name, or whether I have been more." Gideon Marsh crossed that kitchen, and he took his wife's wet hands out of the dishwater, and he held them in his own ruined ones, and he said the truest words he had ever spoken. "Hannah Vesper," he said, "you have been the only thing that ever made this house a home. You walked in here and threw open every shutter in a dead man's heart." I have loved you for 20 years, and been too much a fool to say it. And if you'll have me, truly have me, I'd be your husband in name and in every other way there is, for whatever years the Lord still gives us. And Hannah Vesper, who did not faint, who did not gossip, who did not weep, Hannah Vesper put her face against her husband's chest and wept like a girl. They had 30 more years. 30 years, when the town had said he'd die alone before he was 60. They grew old together in that house, with the open shutters, Gideon's beard going from gray to white, Hannah's iron spine softening, the two of them moving through their days in the deep, unbreakable rhythm of two people who have become, after long decades, very nearly one soul in two bodies. They never had children of their own. That grief they carried quietly between them, and it bound them rather than broke them. They took in two orphaned ranch hands as near as sons, grown men who came to call Hannah and Gideon the old man, and the ranch that was meant to die with a lonely widower instead became the warmest, fullest, most welcoming home in all of Two Forks County. The same town that had whispered scandal came, in the end, to point them out as the truest marriage anyone had ever seen. Look at the Marshes, the young couples were told. That's what it's supposed to be. And no one ever knew Gideon and Hannah never told a living soul that it had begun as nothing but a 4-line advertisement and a cold arrangement for the sake of sense. She went first, as she had always sworn she would, because she could not have borne to be the one left behind. It was a gentle going, in the spring, in their own bed, with the window open and the smell of her garden coming in, and her husband's old hand wrapped around hers. She was 83. Her last words were a complaint about him forgetting to water the roses, and she died with a ghost of a smile on her lips, and Gideon Marsh held her hand until it went cold and did not let go for a long time after. He lived 2 years more. The shutters of his heart did not close again. She had thrown them open too wide for that, and he would not have closed them if he could. He sat on the porch in the evenings, where they had sat for 40 years, and he talked to her in the empty chair, and the ranch hands she had called her sons looked after the old man with the tenderness she had taught them. In his last spring, a young preacher, new to the county, came to call and asked the old man, gently, about the wife everyone still spoke of, and how a marriage so famous for its love had ever begun. Gideon Marsh smiled, and his old eyes filled, and he looked out across the green hills toward the small white stone on the rise where his Hannah lay. She answered an advertisement, he said, for a housekeeper, not a wife. I never meant to love her. I never meant to love anyone, ever again, as long as I lived. To life. I neft. To life. To life. I neft. I neft. I had it all worked out. I was going to live hard and die alone and not feel a single thing. He laughed, soft and broken and full. And then she stepped down off that stage and told me my house was a ruin and ruined every plan I ever made. He wiped his eyes with the back of his ruined hand. Marrying that woman, he said, was the greatest mistake of my careful, cowardly, locked-up life. Because to love her was to know every single day that one day I'd lose her. And I did. And it has very nearly killed me. The young preacher waited. But son, the old man went on, and now he was smiling through the tears, looking at the white stone on the hill the way a man looks at the one true thing in his whole existence. That woman was also the only blessing I was ever given. 40 years she opened my shutters. 40 years she filled my silence. She took a dead man and made him live. And if the good Lord offered me the choice tonight, a long, safe, lonely life with no Hannah in it, or one single year with her, and all the grief of losing her, after I would not even let him finish the asking. He turned his face back to the hills, to the small white stone, to 40 years of a love that had started as nothing but 4 cold lines in a county paper. My greatest mistake, said Gideon Marsh softly, and my only blessing, the same woman, the very same. And I would not trade 1 ounce of the sorrow, for it was the price of the joy, and the joy was worth the whole of my life. They buried him beside her that autumn, on the rise overlooking the hills, where the shutters of 2 long lives stood open at last, and forever to the wide and endless sky.